Someone scratched my car. I am very annoyed, but I know I will meet you today, so I feel better. But if I find out who did it, it will be a completely different story between us. On September 23rd, 2011, on a small road in the Brittany countryside, in the middle of the night, Lionel Floury almost lost his life. 7 stab wounds, an iron bar smashed over his head, and he had only come to change a flat tire. A man suddenly appeared from the darkness, stabbed him with a knife, his teeth as black as when he arrived. Lionel narrowly escaped death. A random attack or an unfortunate encounter, that is what people would believe for a while. But that night was not the first time Lionel faced death, and it would not be the last. Before that, his car brakes had been cut, his wheels sabotaged, and what awaited him after this attack was even worse, slower, and more dangerous. This is the kind of story you could never make up, and you will discover that throughout this documentary. In short, we are talking about a man whom a villain tried to kill up to 6 times within 2 years. 6 times, and yet no body has been found. All right. By this point, that potential killer should probably consider a career change. But who could target a family man with no criminal record, loved by everyone, who always maintained he had no enemies? The police would investigate for months, and what they discovered is that the craziest thing in this entire case is not even the identity of the culprit, but how Lionel could get through all of it for nearly a whole year without having any idea of what was happening behind his back. If you think you are unlucky in life, that is nothing compared to Lionel's story, which I am about to tell you. Our story takes place today in Glénac, a former commune in the department of Morbihan, located in our beloved region of Brittany, the land of galettes, Breton cake, and Saint-Malo yogurt. Wonderful. Until 2011, Glénac was a small commune with 900 residents, but it still had a small harbor to moor boats, or rather paddle boats for those who wanted to go along the Aff River, the river flowing right next to it. From January 1st, 2017, Glénac merged with La Chapelle Gasoline and La Gacilly to become a single new municipality, still keeping the name La Gacilly. That is the end of the geography lesson, but this is very important because, as you can guess, Glénac no longer exists, but our story takes place there. Have you guessed it yet? It was the evening of September 23rd, 2011. Lionel Floury, 38 years old, the wife of Lionel, 43 years old, decided to drive to La Guinguette, a bar where she planned to take her daughter Alizée the next day. Because yes, Muriel would not look up the bar's address on her phone like most people. She preferred to jump into her car at 10 p.m. to find a simple bar. That is the beauty of maternal responsibility. But around 10:30 p.m., while Lionel was relaxing in front of the TV after a long day of work, his cell phone rang. It was Muriel. One of her tires was flat, and she was stranded in the middle of nowhere. Slightly tipsy but worried for his wife, Lionel jumped into his car and went to her without hesitation. Arriving at the scene, Lionel drove slowly and looked for his wife in the pitch-black night. It was 11 p.m., and as usual on countryside roads, there were no streetlights illuminating the night. He finally found her in a slightly secluded spot, parked behind her, and turned on his high beams to have a light source and to be able to turn around quickly. Nothing serious. Lionel was used to the roads and he knew cars well. Then, the husband walked over to his wife's car and bent down to fix the tire, but behind him in the dark, a shadow approached softly, discreetly. The shadow raised its arm, hand holding an iron bar, and brought the weapon down on Lionel's head. Lionel did not understand what was happening. Completely stunned, Lionel did not have time to react before feeling the weight of a man violently crash onto his back and latch onto him. Lionel felt his body being repeatedly stabbed by a knife blade. He felt his face being slashed, his torso pierced. He surged up like a beast, but the attacker still clung tight to him and refused to let go. Lionel himself compared him to a monkey clinging tightly to his back. Going a bit further, Muriel screamed with all her might, "Help! My husband is being attacked!" Yes, listen, I am trying my best. This is the cry for help of a woman in distress. But alone in the middle of nowhere, her cries were heard by no one. Paralyzed by fear before that brutal sight, she lost her composure, crying and screaming. Driven by adrenaline, Lionel did not feel pain and did not realize the severity of his injuries. Finally, he pushed the attacker away and gained the upper hand. Panicked, the stranger fled, leaving Lionel seriously injured and Muriel in a state of shock. Exhausted after the fight, Lionel sat down in the trunk of the car. He could still hear Muriel screaming, told her to calm down, asked if she was okay, and most importantly told her to call for help. But she did nothing. Looking down at his chest, Lionel did not remember if he was wearing a red shirt today, unless his usual white shirt was completely soaked in blood because he was bleeding to death. In total, he was stabbed 7 times, in the carotid artery, lung, liver, eyelid, and chin. Both of his hands were full of cuts, a sign that he had fought back. Lionel again asked his wife to call for help. Muriel tried, but the panic caused her to dial the wrong number. Nearly fainting, Lionel grabbed the phone and called the emergency services. Finally, his wife regained her calm and told the emergency services their location. While waiting for them to arrive, he gradually lost consciousness while Muriel vomited violently, showing the brutality of the attack. When the firefighters arrived, they found Muriel in a state of panic and Lionel dying. He was immediately taken to emergency care. Before being put into the ambulance, he asked his wife to go home, where their 7 children were waiting. The medical staff agreed. There was nothing Muriel could do if she stayed with the children. On the way to the hospital, the father felt his body weakening. He knew it well. He was dying. But what about Muriel? Was she okay? She must be psychologically traumatized. He could not leave his wife with 7 children to raise. Between life and death, Lionel worried for his wife. At 11:30 p.m., he arrived at the hospital in Redden, but his injuries were too severe, and he had to be urgently transferred to the Rennes University Hospital. Lionel got into a helicopter. Well, more precisely, he was transported on a bed inside the helicopter, then it took off. His life was in danger, and he finally ended up in the intensive care unit, where he stayed for 3 days. He remembered the pain well, the stitches, 37 stitches in total, especially the ones on his eyelid. Then, everything went completely blank. During the 3 days spent in the intensive care unit, Lionel recovered quickly and fell into a coma. He was fighting for his life. 3 days of coma. 3 days Lionel fought with all his might to return to his wife and 7 children. And while he clung to life, someone close to him was waiting, grinding their teeth, for the only news that could truly satisfy them, his death. His father, Jean-Pierre, with whom he was very close, visited him every day. Similarly, Alizée, his stepdaughter, whom he considered his own child, learned about the attack at 2 a.m. while returning home after an evening out with friends. Confused and above all panicked with worry for the man who had become like a father to her, Alizée paced back and forth and repeatedly had panic attacks. Due to the violent nature of the attack, an investigation was opened the very next day. Muriel, who witnessed the attack firsthand, was the first to be questioned. She explained that she was there because she planned to take her daughter, Alizée, to the bar La Guinguette the next day. Since she had never been there and did not know the way, she decided to scout the area the day before to prepare in advance. Muriel was still very shaken, with dark circles under her eyes and difficulty speaking. She explained that in the darkness and lack of light, she could not identify the madman who had attacked her husband, the man who loved her with all his heart, whom she still loved just like the beginning. "No one wants someone like him to die," she said. "He is loved by everyone." However, she still remembered a few details. The man wore a hood, looked quite young, and was about 1.70 meters tall. Muriel was quickly cleared. However, investigators still had some questions. Why was she not injured? A very good question, but investigators would not delve deeper into this matter at the moment, as they were mainly focused on Lionel. Who could hate him enough to set such a trap? Alizée, 16 years old at the time, was questioned shortly after. She confirmed her mother's intention. Yes, she had to take her to the open-air cafe, but she did not know the way, and like any worried mother, she wanted to prepare thoroughly. In the middle of the night at 10 p.m., as for the girl, she was drinking with her boyfriend Jean-Sébastien Thomas, 19 years old, and a much older friend, Patrice Pluot. They stayed together late until around 1:30 or 2 a.m., and currently there was not much information, especially since no clues were found at the crime scene. No weapon, no traces, nothing at all. Therefore, the police were completely clueless, but a small clue would be planted when Jean-Pierre Floury himself shared his suspicions with investigators. He believed Muriel was behind it all. He did not know how, did not know why, but he knew. He felt it. Due to the lack of evidence, police would not investigate his accusations further, but they would not forget them. 3 weeks later, Lionel was finally discharged from the hospital. He gradually settled back in, but quickly had to answer questions from the investigators. Like Muriel, whom he described as his lifesaver, Lionel had been unable to see his attacker, and above all, he completely did not understand how he could be harmed to this extent. Lionel had no enemies, but he said that, indeed, recently he had met with a few minor, somewhat suspicious accidents. Lionel recalled that during the previous month, his car had been sabotaged no fewer than 3 times. The first time, his car brakes were cut. The second time, a tire was punctured using just a corkscrew. The third time, critical bolts on his wheels were removed. There were too many coincidences. And at that time, Lionel decided to report it to the police without making a fuss, but enough to record the events in their files because clearly someone wanted to harm him and he was sick of his tires being repeatedly slashed. Gathering all these elements, investigators concluded that the attack the father had just suffered was certainly not a random act. This could be the 4th attempted murder. Lionel was stunned. In reality, no one had any reason to blame him. And wait, Lionel had not finished telling the whole story. About 6 months earlier, he had strayed from the perfect husband image he usually projected and had a fleeting affair with a woman named Natalie for a few weeks. Lionel, a romantic, called it a flirtation, but we all know he did not merely sing love songs to her. The reason Lionel gave was that Muriel was diagnosed with leukemia or ovarian cancer. Sources disagree on the exact diagnosis a year ago, which significantly affected their sex life. For Muriel, it was inevitable. There was no sex during the entire time she was sick. So, it can be said that Lionel felt emotionally deprived at that time. In short, he met Natalie, and Natalie had a husband. Marie, who discovered the affair, even sent Lionel a short message telling him to calm down, and if this continued, she would tell Muriel. After that, Natalie ended this budding relationship. Was this a strong enough motive to kill Lionel? Some people do worse things for lesser reasons, but Natalie's husband was quickly cleared. When questioned about his alibi, he explained that he was at the hospital with his wife that evening at the exact time of the attack. After a few phone calls, police learned that Natalie was indeed undergoing surgery and had her husband by her side. Back to square one, police would continue to investigate the couple. Lionel's childhood was nothing out of the ordinary. He was raised by his father, Jean-Pierre, and mother, Christine, with love and conditional support. He had at least one older sister and a younger brother, 20 years his junior. Despite the age difference, the three siblings were very close and always helped one another. Lionel was an executive and sales manager for the Cortopile restaurant chain. He traveled frequently between the chain's branches, scattered across France, but mostly in the Paris region. Constantly on the move for work, he drove an average of 60,000 kilometers per year. This job, though tiring, allowed him to earn a decent income and have a simple, stable life with his family. In contrast, Muriel Couré's life was a bit more complicated. Born in 1973 and abandoned by her parents at a young age, Muriel was accustomed to the social welfare system and foster families until she was finally adopted. But the joy of finding a new family was short-lived. From childhood, she became a victim of indecent fondling by her adoptive father. She grew up in Six-Seraph and gave birth to a daughter, Alizée, in the mid-1990s. Lionel and Muriel met through work in 1995. Lionel was Muriel's superior, but that did not stop him from being captivated by her. Noticing her intelligence, kindness, ability to listen, and falling deeply in love with her. Being with her, everything made sense. He felt he could give her everything, protect her like no one ever had before, and above all, Lionel loved her young daughter, Alizée, who immediately took a liking to him and whom he quickly considered his own biological daughter. Alizée even called him Papa as she grew up. Lionel and Muriel quickly started a family. A total of 7 children lived under one roof, 4 girls and 3 boys, filling their family home in Gare. In 2001, the couple married. For Alizée, there could be no healthier and more tight-knit family to grow up in. Lionel always gave them boundless love, and they always gave him everything. As the children were born one after another, Muriel became a full-time housewife, dedicating herself entirely to raising them. She tried running a small craft shop in La Gacilly for a while, but quickly gave it up. The family finally moved to Brittany around 2007, settling in Glénac, but this great happiness soon took a turn for the worse. Gradually, the couple's relationship began to fracture. Initially, it was just normal arguments, but they happened more and more frequently. Then major disagreements arose over parenting methods. Lionel wanted them to learn from life, enjoy everything, explore, but Muriel had a stricter view. Between 2007 and 2010, their relationship deteriorated. Muriel became distant, bored from staying at home all day. Lionel, on the contrary, was always away on business trips, always busy, and she was the one who had to manage everything. Then, in 2010, disaster struck. Muriel was diagnosed with cancer, and the treatment prevented her from having sex. Lionel tried to support her as much as possible, but Muriel still seemed to cope well. Already frustrated and going through a difficult period with his wife, Lionel lost his composure and left. Of course, he was not proud of it, and he would suffer enough afterward, poor Lionel. We cannot make things any worse. After 3 weeks in the hospital, Lionel returned home to Glénac. There, Muriel was very attentive, bringing him food and tea, but that was all. She did not spend much time with him, nor did she keep him company. Lionel thought she was busy, and she had taken good enough care of him. Then, slowly but surely, Lionel went back to work. He still felt unwell, probably an aftermath of the accident, but nothing serious. It would pass. Except that it did not pass. On the contrary, his condition worsened during the 5 months following the stroke. For no apparent reason, Lionel suffered from intense fatigue. Intense fatigue here does not mean the lazy type of not wanting to get up in the morning or needing a short nap after eating. The father needed to sleep constantly. He frequently lost focus, did not always know what he was saying, and his health condition was gradually deteriorating. But Lionel, a true professional, still insisted on going to work. Until one day he fell asleep while driving and crashed into a sun shield on the highway. For the 5th time, Lionel almost died. That was enough to convince him to stay home for a while. So, if someone was truly trying to kill Lionel, we are talking about the worst killer to ever appear in a hit TV series. I am sorry, but 5 failed assassination attempts. He needs to change careers. But even without accidents, this breadwinner of the family was quickly forced to become bedridden. His body was completely weakening, and he had no idea why. He had difficulty walking and moving. Lionel could barely move anymore, and when he did move, he only walked on all fours. He completely lost muscle strength in his fingers, and very quickly he could no longer hold a knife and fork and had to eat with his hands. The worst part was when he needed to use the bathroom. Unable to hold it, he could not reach it in time. His family was naturally very worried. Jean-Pierre and Kevin, Lionel's father and brother, frequently came to visit him, but almost every time Muriel forbade them from entering. This made the children sad. Alizée, the eldest of the siblings, said she no longer recognized her father, who used to wake them up in the middle of the night to ask nonsensical questions. The teenager was terrified. She felt as if her father was letting himself die. He was in such a pitiful state. Lionel was no longer aware of what he was doing. He was like someone on drugs, but he was not taking any medication. After a while, Jean-Pierre punched the wall hard and insisted on seeing his son. When Muriel finally let him in, disaster struck. What he saw before his eyes was no longer his son, but a total zombie who could not even stand. Lionel was just a shadow of his former self. Jean-Pierre was extremely angry. Why did Muriel let him reach this dead end, wetting himself, crawling on all fours, even unable to speak anymore? He had to get Lionel out of this hell. He was certain something shady was going on here. Between the assault, sabotage, poor recovery, and accident, Lionel was in danger. Therefore, Jean-Pierre demanded that Muriel put Lionel in a hospital, not just any hospital, but a psychiatric hospital. Urged by those around him, Lionel was hospitalized. Of course, he reacted very violently to this. He was not crazy, as he himself maintained, but he lived among people with various levels of mental health issues, which was enough to make the whole family feel extremely uncomfortable. Furthermore, being in a vegetative state, he could not leave on his own whenever he wanted. He was not considered capable of making decisions. Despite everything, his father, Jean-Pierre, still visited him every day, never missing a single day, unlike Muriel, who only came when she wanted to and never brought the children along. The confinement lasted a total of 27 days. During those 27 days, Lionel longed to see his children, and family life was completely turned upside down. But this hospital stay also revealed part of what had been happening to Lionel since he was discharged from the hospital. Because apart from the assault, metaphorically speaking, Lionel was supposed to be in good health, so there was no reason for him to be that weak. The doctors decided to run tests and take blood samples, and the results were shocking. Although he claimed not to take any medication, the concentration of benzodiazepines in this unfortunate man's blood was abnormally high, 9 times the normal level. Benzodiazepines are medications used to treat anxiety and insomnia, usually slowing down brain activity. They are very potent sleeping pills, which is why they are only sold by prescription, except that Lionel had never been prescribed this medication, and he had ingested enough to knock out an entire elephant. There was no doubt about it. Lionel had been drugged. He was staying in the hospital to eliminate the toxin and recover his health. Afterward, he would go home for the New Year holidays, as he could not bear not seeing his children anymore. At home, everything was fine. Lionel was with his family, enjoying time with his children. It was 2012 already. Happy New Year. Lionel wanted to do everything for his wife, wanted to think about other things, and above all, not mention the attack or the possibility of being poisoned. He wanted to move on and return to normal life. Lionel was very optimistic. If something like that happened to me, I would become paranoid and lock myself in the house. But by Sunday, he again felt weak and tired. On the evening of January 1st, he returned to the hospital. There, doctors discovered that the benzodiazepine level in his body had doubled. Instead of 9, it was now 16 times higher than normal. For the doctors and Lionel's family, there was no longer any doubt. The poisoning was happening at his home. And for Jean-Pierre, it was too obvious. Muriel was behind it all. There was no doubt. You should know that right from the beginning of their relationship, 17 years earlier, neither Lionel's father nor mother approved of the woman in his life. During their first meeting, Muriel came to dinner at the Floury home with Alizée, who was still very young at the time. Just like any other child, the little girl helped herself to snacks without permission. Well, yes, the little girl was hungry and tired of listening to adults talk instead of eating. Everyone found it adorable, except Muriel, who slapped her daughter twice. Shocked and angry, Jean-Pierre lost his temper and demanded that she never hit her daughter in front of him again. When the couple left, Christine looked at them through the window and whispered to her husband, "You know, I'm not sure Lionel dialed the right number." First impressions are often right, especially for parents, and in this case, it was confirmed. That is why, when Lionel was attacked, the whole family united. All of them confessed that they believed Muriel was involved in the incident one way or another. Right from the beginning, the bridesmaids, especially Jean-Pierre, suspected something shady. However, for Lionel, he could not believe even for a second that his wife could do such a thing. After 17 years together, a marriage, and 7 children raised together, all Jean-Pierre needed was proof. Without it, he could not share his suspicions with his son, fearing that he would become defensive and disappear from his life forever. So Jean-Pierre investigated on his own, and his daughter Vanessa told him that she had seen photos of Muriel enjoying herself in a bar with another man on Facebook. And like any father, his first reaction was trying to understand what Facebook was. And this is absolutely not meant to mock. I am just telling the story. And Jean-Pierre immersed himself completely in this. On social media, he discovered the entire hidden side of his stepdaughter, nights out at nightclubs, excessive drinking, and the friend she always went with and kissed in several photos. Muriel was having an affair, and she was not ashamed to admit it. Investigating further, Jean-Pierre found the man's name, Patrice Pluot. On his personal profile, he clearly stated he was in a relationship with Muriel. The status was even changed to fiancé. Immediately, Jean-Pierre printed everything he could and rushed to the police station with his evidence. He could do nothing at the time of the attack, but this secret relationship could definitely help them open an investigation into Muriel. Meanwhile, Lionel gradually realized the situation. It was his brother Kevin who first confided his suspicions to him, which started the poor husband thinking. As a side note, having an affair on your husband and then posting photos on Facebook is truly foolish, especially if Muriel's goal was to kill Lionel to avoid a divorce. Mind you, I am not certain, this is just my own analysis, but in any case, Muriel's strategy made no sense. Finally, it was a remark from his lawyer, who had nothing to do with the case and everyone's relationships, that made him realize what was happening. When Lionel told her everything, because yes, with multiple failed murder attempts he had to contact a lawyer, his lawyer simply asked, "Has your wife been arrested yet?" At that moment, it clicked. Lionel was in danger right inside his own home. He was certain Muriel was behind it all. Too many coincidences. It was unbelievable. Afterward, the father went to stay with his parents while investigators worked. And even if, hypothetically, Muriel was behind it all, Lionel's escape seemed suspicious. Muriel was not smart enough to destroy the evidence. At least, I do not think so. On Facebook, Muriel's completely new life was revealed. Parties, bars, alcohol. The mother was enjoying life and reliving her youth. Of course, there was nothing wrong with that, except that in her case, all of this was happening while her husband, first, was the victim of a murder attempt, second, was the victim of prolonged poisoning lasting months, and third, was forcibly placed in a psychiatric hospital. Even though the couple was having problems, and now we know it, Muriel still seemed to be celebrating her husband's near death, and she displayed it everywhere. A strange atmosphere indeed. Alizée, about 16 at the time, worried herself sick about her father and was tormented by growing anxiety, noticed her mother dressing increasingly provocatively, going to nightclubs and leaving her alone to take care of all her siblings. 6 of them, remember. She herself said she felt like she was taking on the role of the mother. Very quickly, Muriel introduced her children to a man in his 50s named Patrice Pluot. He was a close family friend, coming to boost morale and help out during Lionel's hospitalization. He even stayed at the house for a short time. Patoche was very kind and attentive. And gradually, Muriel did not even try to hide her relationship with Patrice anymore because, yes, you guessed it right, they could not just be playing hopscotch together. The two kissed and held hands in public, even in front of Alizée, who easily figured everything out. Her mother was having an affair on her father, and clearly she thought he was a fool. Worse still, Muriel introduced Patrice to Lionel as a friend when he came home for the New Year weekend. After taking a close look at Muriel's Facebook and discovering the affair, which was not secret at all, investigators decided to dig deeper to find out who Muriel really was and what else she was lying about. They certainly would not be disappointed. Her phone was tapped and police were checking all of her statements. That was why they contacted her hospital and requested the medical records. And then the shock came. Muriel had never had leukemia or any kind of cancer. She had never been sick. She had lied to Lionel, probably to avoid having to sleep with him anymore. In other words, how bad that couple's relationship was. This also explained why she had no problem being in a relationship with her lover, Patrice, the kind friend. And we remember that Patrice had moved in with the family for a while. It was at this time that Muriel became pregnant. Medical records showed a positive test result. The mother, who was about to have 8 children, had stopped taking her birth control pills to have a baby with her lover. True, Muriel was a blatant liar, but currently, Making a husband believe she had cancer to avoid sleeping with him, having a baby with a lover, and going to nightclubs while he was hospitalized was not illegal. It was twisted, but not a crime. That is not to mention the crucial revelations that Alizée, who had been tormented by this for the past few weeks, was about to make. On one hand, she could continue to protect her mother and let her live her new life, despite the risk of her father losing his life. On the other hand, she could help her father recover and escape his abuser by denouncing her mother. In either case, one of them would lose a great deal. Caught between her mother on one side and her father on the other, Alizée was about to break her own family apart. And at 16 years old, she would have to bear the heaviest decision of her life on her own. So on April 17th, 2012, Alizée went to the police station. Anxious, hands sweating, eyes darting around, she hesitated. Maybe she had misinterpreted all the signs, maybe she was overreacting. Was she really going to turn her back on one of her close relatives, the one who had always been by her side? The voice of reason in her head urged her one last time. It was the right thing to do. So Alizée decided to go through with it. She walked into the police station and asked to see the person in charge of the Floury case. During a long interrogation, the teenager explained everything. Her mother had asked her to lie, telling the police that she was actually going to a party at the open-air cafe the next day, and that Muriel did not know the way. The truth was that Muriel had been to that bar multiple times, knew the way very well, and did not need to scout the route in advance. Somewhat alarmed, Alizée still obeyed. After all, it was her mother. She knew what she was doing. Therefore, Muriel's nocturnal adventure was just an excuse to lure Lionel to a deserted place. Alizée continued to recount what actually happened that night. While she was in a bar with her boyfriend Jean-Sébastien and the notorious Patrice Pluot drinking beer continuously, the two men decided to slip away for a while around 11 p.m. He offered no explanation, and Alizée had no reason to suspect at the time. But minutes passed, 15, 30, 45 minutes. What were they doing? When the two clowns finally returned, they seemed a bit tense, but nothing to worry about. In the meantime, Jean-Sébastien had also changed his attitude. Alizée did not ask further at the time, but her mother's request for her to lie the next day raised a series of suspicions in her mind, especially since that night Jean-Sébastien was no longer the same. He was violent, easily anxious, and always on the defensive. She saw him less and less. The final thing that turned her suspicions into reality was the fragmented conversations she overheard between Muriel and Patrice during Lionel's recovery. For example, Patrice asked Muriel to put something in Lionel's tea just to keep him quiet. But there were also conversations idealizing the death of the family patriarch. If Sandor could rest in peace, I wish he would just stay there forever. They were hardly the sharpest pair of killers in the Wild West, but it was by piecing everything together that Alizée understood the truth. The 16-year-old girl realized that her mother was trying to kill her father, that she had manipulated him in September to avoid suspicion, that Patrice was involved, and Jean-Sébastien too. Imagine discovering this kind of family secret. After all, who else can you trust? One thing was certain, Alizée was terrified. The little girl knew more than she should, and clearly her mother did not hesitate to eliminate her husband, so why could she not do it to her daughter? Alizée feared for her own safety and that of her siblings. In addition to that fear, blackmail had prevented her from speaking out for months. Muriel told her that she would never see them again if she decided to reveal any secrets. She was afraid they would harm her. After months of fabrications, she finally wanted the truth to come out so that her father and family could move on with their lives. Alizée's testimony and the clues gathered were enough for the police to arrest Lionel Floury, her mother, Patrice Pluot, her lover, and Jean-Sébastien Thomas, her boyfriend. Thus, there were finally 3 people arrested in this case. What remained was to get all 3 to confess to understand exactly who did what. And the good thing in these kinds of cases is usually when one of the 3 confesses, the others will follow to save themselves. Finally, the trio was interrogated. Patrice Pluot was a man in his 50s who had experienced homelessness. Very little was known about him, except that he was a regular at bars and had an alcohol problem, best avoided when riding a bicycle. They met Muriel in early 2011, and the two started a relationship. Muriel was bored with her life as a housewife. She had long fallen out of love with Lionel and wanted to escape this relationship, this unhappy marriage, but not through a simple divorce. She viewed Patrice as an easily manipulated man who would do anything for love, and she was right. For his part, Jean-Sébastien Thomas was Alizée's boyfriend. He was around 19 years old in 2011, around because no article about this incident confirmed it. Sometimes he was 17, sometimes 20, then 22. So we will use Lionel's own words when he spoke about Jean-Sébastien. He was quite a misfit, doing odd jobs and hanging around in bars. In September 2011, he was a security guard and lived alone. Having little contact with his parents, he became independent very early and lived a secluded life, making him easily manipulated. She and Patrice invited him out for a beer, a way for him to get to know his future mother-in-law. The couple and the young man became friends. Muriel and Patrice showered him with kindness, as parents usually do. Jean-Sébastien regained the sense of trust and understanding that he no longer felt from his parents, but as if sensing something was wrong, he said nothing about this developing relationship to Alizée. The young girl also noticed her boyfriend starting to distance himself, drinking more and more, and after the attack, Jean-Sébastien did not even go to work or attend parties like before. When questioned, Patrice and Jean-Sébastien both denied everything. Patrice maintained he was just a close family friend, and both reiterated that they were at the bar with Alizée on the night of the attack. However, as we have seen, Alizée was tired of covering for them. In addition, police had searched their phones and tracked them quite easily. On the evening of September 23, 2011, both cell phones were found at the scene of the attack. Jean-Sébastien's phone at 11 p.m. when Lionel also arrived, but Patrice's phone only appeared at 11:15 p.m. after the crime had been committed. Rule number 1, when planning a murder, you must leave your phone at home to be safe. But no, our two geniuses that day brought their phones, turned them on, and used them right at the attack scene. Might as well have signed an attendance sheet at the entrance. For the police, there was no room for doubt. Both were involved. However, Patrice could not be the one who stabbed them. It was Jean-Sébastien. So what was his role? Patrice explained that he arrived after the event had occurred, but when Muriel contacted him in a panic, he appeared like a great savior. Well, that did not sound right. Right, Patrice, he was the great savior who happened to appear to save everyone 15 minutes after the failed murder attempt. He thought we were all fools, Patrice. He had to stop. While waiting for a confession, the 3 men were detained at the Vannes police station, then formally charged on the morning of May 29, 2012. This indictment came just 2 months after Alizé's testimonies, but the police had prepared thoroughly during that time, gathering enough evidence to force them all to confess. The first to speak was Jean-Sébastien, just as you guessed. The young man admitted to agreeing to kill Lionel on September 23, 2011, in exchange for 50,000 euros that Muriel had promised. Since he was facing financial difficulties at the time, that plan seemed quite good to him. However, considering Muriel's completely crazy plan and her low IQ, 50,000 euros in exchange for a life sentence after murder was not exactly a good plan, but that is just my personal opinion. So, obviously, because he failed his mission, Jean-Seb never received the 50,000 euros and had no real reason to protect Muriel anymore. Under pressure from the police, he explained everything. Muriel's plan, her affair, the involvement of Patrice, her lover, and his being manipulated, as well as his remorse for his crime, asserting that he only followed orders. Then came Muriel's turn. Initially, she denied all accusations, but was quickly exposed by her daughter. Now getting out of this mess became quite complicated. Therefore, Muriel confessed, "Yes, I planned to assassinate him, but it was an impulsive decision. Divorce would be too complicated. I just wanted him to disappear." Muriel's attitude throughout the interrogation puzzled investigators, who found it hard to understand her personality. She explained that she had been looking for bad boys for a while and had even asked Alizée to introduce her to one. So naturally, Alizée did not help her mother much, who had to turn to Jean-Sébastien, a completely lost 19-year-old guy, and Patrice, a pillar of the local child welfare services, 2 men who were definitely not bad boys, as there was no one better to help. During the second interrogation, Muriel confessed to drugging her husband with benzodiazepine sedatives during his convalescence. She said she gave him the medicine without knowing what was in it. The purpose was to weaken him a bit, not to kill him. She did put a little in his tea, but nothing serious. Similarly, she denied any connection to the sabotage of Lionel's car before the attack. And we are still not done with these flimsy excuses, but let us switch to Patrice first, who finally admitted his involvement. At the same time, because he had no other choice, Patrice explained that he only picked up Jean-Sébastien from the scene of the attack that night. What he failed to mention was that he himself was the one who handed the knife to Jean-Sébastien, and both rushed to dispose of it by throwing it out of the car window in the middle of the night. These 3 testimonies help us understand what actually happened on the evening of September 23, 2011, and fortunately for Lionel, we are certainly not dealing with notorious criminals. When Lionel returned home after a long day of work, Muriel told him she was going for a drive. She had to take Alizée to a bar tomorrow and wanted to know the route. No problem, just be careful. Lionel was too tired to go with her, plus it was almost 10 p.m. Upon leaving the house, Muriel called Jean-Sébastien, her daughter's boyfriend. No problem. I will pick you up in 15 minutes. At a bar in Glénac, Jean-Sébastien hung up. He, Alizée, and Patrice were having a good evening, laughing and drinking beer. They apologized to his girlfriend a lot. A small urgent matter. He had to go, but it would not be long. He signaled to Patrice as he left, and somehow Patrice handed him a knife. The two men looked at each other. There was no turning back anymore. Jean-Sébastien left, the knife hidden in his pocket, leaving Alizé alone with Patrice, both of them confused. It was 10:15 p.m. Outside the bar, Jean-Sébastien jumped into Muriel's car. The two drove to a small secluded road in the hamlet of Bronc-Ferré, still in the Glénac area. Hidden out of sight, it was hard for anyone to get caught, except Lionel, of course. Together, they punctured one of Muriel's tires and found the perfect hiding place for Jean-Sébastien and the ambush. When the scene was ready, Muriel took her phone and called her husband. It was 10:30 p.m. "Lionel, I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I just broke down. I'm alone. It's so dark. I don't know what to do." Lionel did not hesitate. He rushed to put on his jacket, grabbed his keys, and drove to the location his wife indicated. While waiting for the husband, Jean-Seb hid behind the bushes. He texted Patrice, or perhaps called him, unless the three accomplices had prearranged the pickup time. However, Patrice knew that he had to meet them by car, that he was the one who had to pick up Jean-Seb after the crime. Therefore, Patrice left the bar a bit later, leaving Alizé completely alone. He went to his car and drove to the scene of the attack. Exactly at 11 p.m., Lionel arrived. Jean-Sébastien saw him emerge from his hiding place. He clenched the knife in his hand. Was he really going to do it? Kill his girlfriend's father? What would she think of him if she found out? Was he even capable of taking someone else's life? No more questions. He was thinking about the 50,000 euros and all the things he would buy with that money. No more odd jobs. Real life was starting, and that meant getting rid of this poor guy. Why not? As soon as Lionel bent down next to the tire, Jean-Seb stepped out of the bushes. He glanced at Muriel one last time, checking if this was truly what she wanted. Muriel nodded, as if commanding him to strike. The young man's hesitation vanished as he lunged at Lionel and jumped on him, restraining him. There, he struck once, twice, 4, 6, 7 times. He stabbed blindly, but almost certain that he hit vital spots. What Jean-Sébastien did not expect was Lionel's strength. When Lionel fought back, he threw Jean-Sébastien off. The attacker let go and fell to the ground. Panicked, he fled. With the current injuries, Lionel would not last long anyway. Around 11:15 p.m., Patrice drove up a short distance away, just as Jean-Sébastien ran up, knife in hand, T-shirt covered in blood. He jumped into the car and Patrice sped away. Once they reached a safe distance, the two men threw the knife out the window, and Patrice took his new friend home so he could change his clothes. After that, he returned to the bar, where Alizé was patiently waiting for them. That was their alibi. At the same time, Muriel panicked, seeing Lionel still alive and conscious. She tried to buy as much time as possible, pretending to be in shock and unable to contact emergency services. It was all a lie. Back home, Jean-Sébastien quickly changed clothes and cleaned himself up, then returned to the bar around 11:30 p.m. and met Alizé and Patrice without being noticed by anyone, except that Lionel survived, and more importantly, he was strong enough to call emergency services himself. It was a miracle that he survived, and even if he had died, given Muriel's stupidity and her leaving clues all over the internet and on his phone along with her comical accomplices, she would have been caught anyway. Her murder plan was far from perfect. Afterward, Muriel spent several months crushing benzodiazepine sedatives and sneaking them into Lionel's food or tea. That was why she was so attentive, always with the aim of getting rid of him. So then, it all sounds fine. Actually, not quite. But, the real question is why try to kill your husband at least 6 times within 2 years? There were 3 attempts to sabotage the car, the assault, the poisoning, and the car accident. The truth is quite simple and as old as the world. Money. Upon further investigation, police discovered Muriel's spending habits. A closer look at the couple's expenses revealed significant sums. She was accused of withdrawing nearly 67,000 euros in the 2 years prior without ever informing Lionel. And that was not all. While her husband was hospitalized, Muriel took out an 18,000 euro loan using his signature. Obsessed with money and also burdened with debts, from unpaid rent to the children's education costs, arguments escalated between the couple, making them unable to tolerate each other. Money was becoming the source of conflict. Muriel constantly lied to her husband and no longer wanted a divorce, but she risked losing custody of the children. Because on top of everything, Muriel was also the subject of a child protection investigation. Why was that? We do not know, but clearly she would not win custody of the children in the event of a separation, and above all, she would never receive the money from Lionel's life insurance policy. As someone who drove frequently and worried about his children's future, Lionel Floury purchased life insurance through his company. In the event of his death, his wife and children would receive a large sum of money. Enough to ensure 7 children could go to school. The insurance policy was worth 600,000 euros, but would double if death occurred on the road. Lionel drove 60,000 kilometers per year. That meant he would make over €1 million if he died on the road. Suddenly, the three intentional acts of sabotaging his car and the accident related to the poisoning made sense. In short, with Lionel's death, Muriel would keep the children, become rich, and could live an affluent life with her new lover. Faced with such clear evidence, it was hard for Muriel to defend herself, but Mumu would certainly make things difficult for investigators. Her eyes blurred with crocodile tears, Muriel confessed that she gave her husband benzodiazepine sedatives because he sometimes became aggressive and violent to the point of endangering himself and others. That was how the mother admitted to being a victim of domestic violence. Lionel insulted her, screamed at her face, and even almost hit her with a car once. After all, he had confessed to an affair, shattering his perfect husband image. Such violence is easier to accept, right? But in reality, it was not. The image of the abused woman strongly impacted Jean-Sébastien, who specifically accepted the attack voluntarily and with a desire to protect her. The problem was that if Muriel was recognized as guilty of domestic violence, she would enjoy mitigating circumstances, and her sentence would be reduced, whereas if her financial motive stood, she could face a very heavy sentence. Therefore, investigators took these statements seriously and conducted an inquiry, except that no one close to the couple confirmed or even mentioned any arguments. Lionel spoke loudly, and the children confirmed that their father was indeed very, very calm. Even Alizé, after the trial, said she had never witnessed any violence and only saw her parents argue once in 20 years. But Muriel remained stubborn and feigned innocence. She did not think the medicine she was given was that strong and would have such a significant effect. Occasionally, she used that medicine herself. She just wanted Lionel to have a good night's sleep. Then a moment later, she explained that she wanted to kill her husband, but it was only momentary. Realizing all efforts were futile, Muriel finally admitted full responsibility. She had indeed ordered the attack, poisoned her husband, and repeatedly tried to kill him, but she never did it for money. Whether this testimony is credible or not would be decided by the jury at the court of first instance. In the period between the detention and the trial, quite a few things happened. First, Muriel gave birth to her 8th child in prison, the child she had with Patrice. Lionel also filed for divorce, and the procedure was completed very quickly under the circumstances, as you can imagine. Thus, Muriel became Muriel Curé again. On Tuesday, May 13th, 2014, the trial for the assault on Lionel on September 23rd, 2011, opened at the Morbihan Assize Court in Vannes. Right from the first day, Muriel declared that she had separated from Patrice, who learned this news live at the same time as everyone else. On this occasion, she also accused him of supplying the weapon to Jean-Sébastien, admitted to attempted murder, apologized to Lionel and Alizé, and pleaded guilty. The next day, Lionel testified, his voice choked with emotion, and before his true suffering, the arguments of the lawyers, depicting Muriel as a pitiful, manipulated woman, Jean-Sébastien as a lost boy, and Patrice as someone who did not remember the knife, had no effect. According to the prosecutor, they all admitted their involvement but minimized their own roles. Only Jean-Sébastien took full responsibility for his actions. Regarding the sentences, Muriel, the mastermind, received 20 years in prison. Jean-Sébastien, the one who directly used the knife to commit the crime, received 12 years, and Patrice, for complicity, received 10 years. Everyone accepted the verdict except Patrice, so in the end, not all accepted it. This man still appealed. Therefore, the case started again 3 years later, on May 9th, 2017, before the Ille-et-Vilaine Assize Court in Rennes. Basically nothing was new. The 3 sentences were maintained, but the atmosphere was very heavy. Lionel and Alizé arrived together. Opposite them, Muriel listened without showing any emotion. The drama was over. Alizé, her face clearly sad, confided that she did not know if she would ever be able to forgive her. The only real change was that Patrice appeared in court as a free man, having been released from prison in February 2016 for good behavior. He had served a 10-year sentence for providing the knife, driving the getaway car, and witnessing Jean-Sébastien stab a man he did not even know 7 times. 3 years later, he was released for good behavior, of course, and how wonderful for the great French justice system. After all sentences were upheld, everyone tried to return to normal life. Patrice, now a free man, seemed to be living a good life. He constantly posted selfies on Facebook, boasting about his happiness of being free. He moved to the north in 2021, and his Facebook status announced that he was engaged. Meanwhile, Muriel was making the most of her time in prison. Confined in the women's prison in Rennes, she no longer had contact with Patrice, nor with her 7 children who did not visit her. She was sad, but she understood. They are still angry with me, which is normal. So Muriel was pursuing her studies. She was in her 3rd year of history and 1st year of modern literature. Alizé had a hard time overcoming that ordeal. Without evidence, she would never have believed her mother was capable of doing all those things. After the sentence was pronounced, she realized she would not see her mother for 20 years, but in any case, it was better than never seeing her father again. But the young woman turned her grief into energy, founding the Fascinate Association to help children whose parents are serving prison sentences. Lionel has also given interviews multiple times, appearing in documentaries and on television to share his story. And indeed, he had many stories to tell after surviving multiple assassination attempts, poisonings, and stabbings. Lionel was truly a wonderful person. In November 2020, he appeared on the set of Ça commence aujourd'hui, and he did not hesitate at all to express himself, not his emotions. He explained the difficulty. Thanks to her, he rebuilt his life. He showed a clear lack of trust towards women, except those he already knew, especially Natalie, his former lover, with whom he now lives. The two have a large family with 10 children. She gave him time to rebuild his life, and he also brought a new life to his 6 biological children who no longer see their mother, and some still need psychological support. Jean-Pierre, standing next to his son during Faustine's show, tearfully expressed his admiration for Lionel's courage. He could not be prouder of his strength, perseverance, and optimism. Finally, Lionel described himself as happy today. He has turned the page. Everything is finally well, at least this time. If you have watched this inspiring video, high-flying video, please leave a comment to encourage him, because Lionel showed extraordinary courage in surviving all those assassination plots. And above all, do not hesitate to message him. If he happens to see this video, I think he might read your comments. See you again. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Your support is always appreciated and helps the channel. And after that, goodbye.